This is the Darren Paltrocast with Darren Paltrowitz. I've been interviewing musicians, comedians, and all sorts of entertainers for almost 20 years. Joan Rivers, Flavor Flav, Paris Hilton, members of Guns N' Roses and the Eagles, and countless others. This show is about artists and why they do what they do. Greetings from Kansas City, Missouri, where I've spent the last 48 hours thanks to Visit KC. This is a wonderful, wonderful city that's been a pleasure to visit. And the city actually ties into two of the people that I interviewed for this episode, which I'll get into more depth about. But first is my interview with Ben Folds. You definitely know Ben Folds from his work with the Ben Folds Five, but he's also worked for decades as a prolific composer for a variety of TV and film projects. And his latest project is the book, A Dream About Lightning Bugs. It's part memoir, part inspirational tale about creativity. It's really, really worth reading. And over the course of my conversation with Ben, I brought up the fact that I was about to see him here in Kansas City. He's currently on tour with the Violent Femmes. And also I asked him about what's coming up for him. Hi, Ben. How's it going there today?
I'm good. How you doing?
I am doing great. And I first want to ask you about your new book. And I'm curious if this was the first time you'd been offered a book deal or if it's something in the past that you'd turned down and this was the right time to do it.
I have offered a book deal. It didn't get to that stage, but it has been brought up by publishers before, I could write a book to describe my writing process, take a song at a time or something that involves my photography, stuff like that. But it just seemed to be the right time. I'd written a lot of stuff now, so I just took it by the reins.
So was this the kind of thing where you'd had the outline done and you'd had some samples and then you'd had to write the rest of it?
I had a lot of what I thought would be moments, little parts of essays, interstitial stuff. I figured that would be the nature of the contribution of what I had written to date. I didn't have an outline for it, resisted chronology for a while. And then the more I wrote, I realized, okay, it's time for an outline, a mission. And then, then that was about 6 months.
And was it the kind of thing where you wrote on a daily basis or you just would pick it up for a month or two and then put it away?
I did a lot of that for a while. It was much more part-time for a while. And then I guess it was last summer, I just took 3 months and I just hit it every day. Professional writer. Go downstairs, shut the door to my office, lock myself in until I had 2,000-3,000 words a day. And kept proceeding in that way. And that begins to really clarify things, It's a process that I enjoy talking about that you don't need to hear all about, but just like overshooting the narrative sometimes and redundancy and all the things that you need to kind of get through to really get to the mission is fascinating to me. And I loved it. And I love the process of cleaning and economizing the piece just within inches of being dumb. I really loved that about it. You begin writing like a writer, and I see a lot of my peers do that, and they make a book about life or about something, and it is written like a writer. And I didn't want to write like a writer any more than I enjoy singing like a singer, if that makes any sense.
It absolutely does make sense. And I'd imagine if you were, for 3 months doing it every day, that the songwriting had to go on hold?
Oh, no, my songwriting's always on hold. I write songs when I have to for my albums. And by that time, I'm, find out that I'm really pregnant with song. But it's not something I do on a regular basis. And then the book was kind of like an album for me. It's like, okay, let's get down and do this. Just do it. And then spend all my time on it as a project. I enjoy working that way. I don't as much like a photographer that's on assignment, Photograph Pittsburgh. I would enjoy staying 3 to 6 months and photographing every day. I prefer that way of doing things than going, okay, well, I'm just writing songs all the time, and then I've got enough, and then make an album. That's not really my style, and I think that's great when people do it, but I just don't keep up. I don't keep it up that way.
Well, that makes a lot of sense considering that 8 and 8 project that you did with Amanda Palmer, Neil Gaiman, and Damien from OK Go. And has there been any offer to do any project along those lines again, where you just have to write stuff and it has to come out that same day or week or year?
No, nobody makes offers, I don't think, to songwriters unless it's a musical or a movie. I feel like there's not that kind of music business anymore. If I make an album, it's not going to be because, I have a deadline or anyone wants me to make one. That isn't business. I mean, I have an audience that I'm sure would be very happy if I would make one right now, but the business used to be much more, pressure you much more to do it because they had the machinery ready to go and push you through. And now I think it's like, no one really does that. But I love working quickly like I did especially working with Neil and Amanda and Damien. I mean, they're such sharp minds for making music, and I trust them, and that was a lot of fun. And I always try to make up something freestyled at my gigs, and sometimes I dictate this to orchestras if I'm playing with a symphony orchestra. So I enjoy that way of creating. I think I really have to roll my sleeves up and have some space to craft. And that's what I did with the album. With the book. I treated it like an album. I was like, okay, now I am finishing and crafting these chapters. They will work together. I'll keep going over it. Make it something that does something that I want it to do. Okay,
well, the book, of course, one of the recurring themes is that you're a freelancer and you're doing things on your own terms. Related to, your journey as a freelancer, I'm curious when in your life you realized that it was actually a blessing and not a curse to be able to be a freelancer.
Well, I mean, I never really enjoyed working for other people. I like with the exception of when I did a little bit of theater in New York. I by that time I was tired of rejection as a musician, and I was enjoying, and that was in my early 20s, mid-20s, I was enjoying the structure of having an employer. But, the record labels in the 90s were there was so much pressure to have products that would sell out in each quarter, that pressure would be applied to the artist. And I think that was a good thing.
I think it's very admirable how many chances you've taken over the years. You've dipped your toe into acting. I remember you had a cameo in the show Love Monkey. And looking back, is acting something you'd like to do more of in the future?
I did a few things for You're the Worst, which is a TV show on, I guess, FX channel. It was pretty funny. It got me recognized all over the place as the guy who played Ben Folds on that TV show. Very funny. A girl in a local coffee shop, said, "I know who you are now. You're the guy that plays Ben Folds on You're the Worst." My main thing I feel like is writing. And so a book is important to me. An album is important to me. Playing the album live is like pretty close to second place as a musician. First place is writer. Then second place is a performer of what I write. Anything else is just either advocacy for the arts, that's giving back. Doing television or acting is just playing. It's like, I've never played golf. It's like playing golf for me. It's something to do every once in a while. It's not that important or not to me. And when the opportunity comes up, I think, that's kind of fun, but I would never really pursue that.
Well, in terms of performance, I've heard a rumor, and I've never heard this substantiated, that as amazing as you are at the piano, that you're an even better drummer. Is that true?
Yeah, it could be. I've played so much piano over the years now. I've certainly caught up, but I didn't study the piano like I did drums. And drums was a very formative, studied, trained, disciplined thing for me. So I'm pretty good at that. But, dude doesn't play drums very much over the last 25 or 30 years. So, I was just playing a little bit to show the drummer that I'm working with right now some things that I've wanted to try to see him do on some of the songs. And I'm like, I can still play.
Have you ever composed any songs just singing while playing the drums?
No, I don't really write at instruments to begin with usually. My writing comes from melodies that I begin to think of, and then I take that process to an instrument. I don't think I've ever really even hashed it out on a drum set. I've had to use a bass guitar a lot of times because for one reason or another in a lot of the places I've lived, I hadn't had a piano, but I've had a bass guitar sitting around, so I'll just make sure that the key is right and that the chord motion seems to be what I think that it is, and I'll continue writing.
I think it's the Fear of Pop album where people realize that you are a multi-instrumentalist, and I don't think I've ever heard a recording of you playing the guitar. Do you play the guitar or just the bass?
Yeah, I play. I'm a much better bassist. On the album Rock in the Suburbs, I'm playing the guitar on that.
And being that you've moved over the years, at this point in time, I believe you're based in Santa Monica, but is all of your gear in one place?
No, it's all over the shop. It's in storage and in Nashville, and some of it's at a studio, and it's all over the place. I've got pianos loaned out to friends of mine. I've got 3 friends sitting with grand pianos in their living rooms for the last 10 years. So I don't know if I'll ever get them back.
Is it the same way in terms of your recording studios that you have multiple spots that you can record in at any given time?
Yeah, I think there's no short on recording studios. And I like a proper studio these days. So, yeah, those are around, you know. I think we know of a studio anywhere that I need to use a studio. I had a couple I really enjoyed out in Santa Monica. I've had a couple I enjoyed upstate in New York and some places and you know, Avatar in New York City is neat, and studios all over the place. Nashville's chock full of them, beautiful studios.
And moving ahead a couple of weeks, I'm going to have the pleasure of seeing you live in Kansas City while I'm there on a press trip. And this upcoming tour that you have with the Violent Femmes, how did that come together? Did you know those guys before the tour was booked?
It's funny you mentioned Kansas City. Jason Sudeikis has one of my pianos. The Violent Femmes? No, I don't know the Femmes. I'm going to meet them in about 2 days. And
any idea if you might come out for a song or two on stage, or is that just the kind of thing that gets discussed backstage after you meet them?
I think you play those things by ear. We shall see. It's always fun. It's often really on tours like this, you don't even really see the people that you're touring with. You wouldn't think it's like that, but everyone has these schedules of press and things that they're doing, and one shows up later and there's sound checks at a different time. And, you know, I could do this tour and never meet those guys if that's what I wanted, but I'm very interested to meet them, and I love their records and the mark that they've made on pop music. So I can put some of this on a Chicago website. Do you remember the first time that you ever played live in Chicago? Well, there was some place called like Double Door or Red Door or something Door. I remember playing that. Maybe 95. That's a pretty good memory right there. And did you ever record any of your albums or write any of your stuff in Chicago specifically? No. You know, one of the first spontaneous songs that I ever made on stage, where I started to realize, oh, this is the thing where I can actually, you know, kind of start freestyling a song with chords and melody and everything, was in Chicago. And it was this waltz, and it's still in my head. I still know that song. Years, I've never put it on an album, but it's a really pretty song, and that happened in Chicago. Included, of course, the compulsory names of everyone from Wesley Willis to Liz Phair to go into the song, Wilco, etc. Wesley Willis is definitely missed. So ultimately, another thing that I think is amazing is looking at your website, you have Symphony gigs listed for next year. How far ahead are things usually booked for you? Symphony Orchestra World is quite a ways in advance. And even at that, I think we probably book last minute as far as the symphonies are concerned. We kind of know the arc of where we're heading a year out usually, and then enough space in there to shift gears if we want to, and for me to be interested in something else and move in another direction. But, you know, the symphony gigs on the books, we're doing those. With all that said, is the album recording process you said earlier, you know, people might want to hear that from you. You don't know when the next one's going to be happening, and you look at your book as really your latest creative endeavor.
Do you think that there might be an album between now and those symphonic gigs in 2020?
It's possible I'll start working on it. I mean, I'm inspired to make an album at the moment. It's only that I'm touring basically in support of the book, so it's hard to know, but I'll certainly get there. I don't know if I would have anything by then. I need to carve out the kind of time that I did for the book.
So in closing, Ben, any last words for the kids?
The kids, be sure to floss,
Next up is my chat with William DuVall. He is the frontman of Alice in Chains, but more importantly, I would say, is that he has a new solo album out called One Alone. William has been really prolific as a singer and songwriter over the years. As we talk about within the interview, he has been in all sorts of bands in the Atlanta area, and he's still doing amazing work. I really love the One Alone album, and I had the pleasure of talking with him while he was visiting New York City as part of a press day. So thanks to Jamie Roberts for making that one happen, and I really recommend William's new album. One Alone is the new record, and when you listen to this album, it's not clear if it's the kind of thing that you wrote and recorded in 10 days or if it was 3 years in the making. Which one was it closer to?
Well, the actual recording time was extremely quick because one session, the 8 songs were recorded in one day, and then the remainder of the songs were recorded in one evening session. So in terms of actual recording time, very, very quick. In terms of gestation, from idea to recording to now the release, well, that was longer. That was longer, but that was more a question of timing.
Sure.
And particularly timing vis-a-vis what we do in Alice in Chains and that sort of thing. We were so busy for such a long time, and then between like in 2016, after the Devil the Dinosaurs campaign, I might have done something like this then, but then the Giraffe Tongue Orchestra album came about. That band came about, and it was just sort of like, well, let's go where the ship seems to be taking me, and that was really, really great. Extremely proud of that record. But again, the windows of time are only so many, and so
right
now we get to this point, and it's just like, well, this is great. This is the time. This is the time. And particularly after all the albums I've done that were so band oriented, and there was, very rock oriented and very kind of getting right in your face with a certain kind of impact. This was really, I think, it was an ideal time. I'm glad it worked out this way, because it turned out to be an ideal time to just get really reductive and pare everything down to one voice, one guitar, all the way through. Completely different, much more intimate experience. Total palate cleanser from all the, rock records of the last 2 decades. And in my case, even longer than that, because of the punk rock and everything. And it was just a really great thing to do, I think. And I think it also allows us, meaning myself and any audience that cares, the opportunity to build from here,
Right. When I listen to this album, though, to me, and no artist really wants to be compared, but it sounds like Jeff Buckley meets Sabbath in the sense that it's like a singer-songwriter melodic deal, yet there's a lot of drop T, and you're using like the bottom 2 strings of the guitar, and part for rhythm, but you're also finger picking at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's metal singer-songwriter in a way. And
there you go. I like it.
I'm glad you like it.
Like
You're not going, well, I stand and I sound exactly what I sound like.
I love it.
So listen to that feeling and that vibe. Did you ever say this was going to be a band album? Did you ever track any of the songs or demo them as being more than just you and your guitar?
Well, some of the songs on this album are actually acoustic renderings of songs that I previously recorded with my band Comes With the Fall. Mm-hmm. And so some of them were perhaps written on acoustic guitar, but then transferred to a band format. And this album, One Alone, gets those songs back to their origin point in a way. Mm-hmm. you know, and I feel like it's sort of, again, like the most purely distilled version of those songs in terms of what it was like when they were being written. For this album, I would say from conception to now the, you know, actual release, it was always intended to be a solo acoustic album for all the reasons I said before. It's like, let's just pare it down and let's just have this kind of experience, and then let's see if we can build back up from there, you know. So future albums I might do under my own name, they might, you know, there probably will be, you know, more dynamic rock records involving other musicians. But this was really the time and the place to do this kind of thing.
Well, somebody who's been following you a long time, and as you alluded to before, Alice in Chains is 20-ish years into your career. So you started off in the hardcore punk scene of Atlanta. Then you did sort of a poppy soul thing there in the late 80s. And then, of course, there's the Dion Ferris Detour, which I do want to talk about later if you don't mind. And Comes with the Fall. Yeah. And, of course, Alice in Chains. So you've pretty much touched on every genre imaginable. So it's hard to say, well, this is what William sounds like. This is what his natural sound is. But there's a lot of people from Atlanta that can say that same thing about, like, somebody like Rich Ward or Butch Walker. Are those guys that you ever cross paths with?
Occasionally, yeah. I mean, it's a small town in a way. Every town's a small town when you get into the music scene in a way. I mean, even Los Angeles, you run into a lot of the same folks. And New York, I'm sure it's the same. And so Atlanta,
less so.
Atlanta was certainly one of those kind of towns where you're gonna cross paths. You know, I was great friends with David Ryan Harris, who was in a great band from that time, Follow for Now, and has now gone on to a illustrious solo career and plays with John Mayer, and he produces and writes for other people. He's done all sorts of things now. But we were real pals back then, you know, the kind of like, we were like 4-track buddies, you know, like we were, you know, he sort of showed me how to use a 4-track, you know. He was kind of one of those guys that we would get together, and I mean, you know, nobody had any money or anything. We were all living in the same apartments, and you know, it was a very small, tight community in that regard. And this was after the punk scene for me. So this is the post-punk era for me, getting more into, oh my God, I got to make a career out of this kind of thing. You know what I mean? And they were all struggling with that same thing. It's like, what are we gonna do? You know? So yeah, it was a great time, and yeah, you know, it seems like some of us from that time, Rich Ward, Butch Walker, as you mentioned, David Harris in his own way, and me in my own way, we've all sort of come out of that into the wider world, doing a vast array of things, you know. And I think it speaks to the diversity of taste in music that we all, I think, always had. I mean, obviously Rich Ward is a bit more into the hard rock and metal thing, but you know, guys like David Harris and me, you know, we listened to all kinds of things, and we couldn't have imagined our musical upbringing any other way. And so that's naturally going to be reflected in everything that we do. In one way or another, it's gonna find its way in there. It's never going to be a straightforward thing with us. Never.
And do you still call Atlanta your home these days?
I'm there these days when I'm not on the road for the most part. Yeah, I lived in LA for 10 years, and that was really cool, and that, you know, definitely played an important role in my life and career. But yeah, I'm more or less back in Atlanta when I'm not on the road now.
So at this point in your career, you've been touring the world and recording more of your life than you haven't. And I'm curious when you knew that this was going to be a career as opposed to a series of one-offs or projects.
When music was going to be that?
That you knew that you weren't going to have to temp and play in a cover band to be able to do your own artistic endeavors.
Right. I would say, in terms of that sort of careerist kind of aspect, it was around the time of the Dion thing. Mm-hmm. Because that was such a huge success in terms of pop radio. And
yeah, Grammy nominated song.
Yeah. And it was the first time that I had been associated with anything like that. My life prior to that was strictly underground, and proudly so. I mean, first generation hardcore and all that stuff.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? And like that was, we never thought about, not in a serious way, any sort of career. I mean, you want to. I wanted to be a musician from the time I was 8 years old, and it was very clear to me that somehow, some way, I was going to make that happen. But if anything, I was probably very naive and somewhat delusional in terms of what my tastes were versus what the popular tastes were.
Right.
It was a huge disconnect. And so, I might have been thinking, this particular song that I'm writing for Neon Christ, I don't see why this couldn't be huge. I don't see why we could, in that time period too, you had like Husker Du signing to Warner Brothers. You had like, there were these weird little things that were happening that were kind of an outgrowth of our scene, and we thought, well, why couldn't we be a part? But you're insane, because it's like, well, no, they're not going to. No, it's not the same. And then later on, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I had this group No Walls,
yes,
and we were doing sort of a jazz, rock, world music.
I heard Vernon
hybrid.
Reed was a fan.
He was a huge fan,
yeah.
And he was a really great supporter. He brought us here to New York, several times, trying to get anyone to pay attention that he possibly could, and the industry just wasn't ready. But, I'm there thinking in my delusional state of mind, like, oh, I'll be doing duets with Edie Brickell on the Grammys, like, this time next year. You know what I mean? I'm thinking, why not, And we'd play every place you could play here. We played the Cat Club and CB's and, Kenny's Castaways and
Kenny's
Woody's. Wow. Remember Ron Wood had a club here, Woody's. We'd play all this place in the course of a week. And every A&R person would come down and they'd be like, yeah, no. You know what I mean? But, again, at that time, it was like 1990, so mm-hmm. It's like, it's pre-Nirvana, it's pre-everything, it's pre-Seattle, all that stuff. None of that was even a thing in terms of the popular culture. So you had the same guys who were working the Warrant record coming down to see this kind of really eclectic, sort of, like, really emotive, biracial trio.
Mother's Finest Part 2, 15 years later.
And even more esoteric than that in some ways. I mean, and because again, we were doing kind of what Buckley would end up doing a few years later.
Sure.
I mean, and so it was just it was an interesting period. Maybe if No Walls would have hung on a little bit longer, things might have turned out differently, but, we didn't. And, so, and that got me into much more of a kind of careerist mindset, because I was like, oh my God, now we got adulthood encroaching.
Right.
Now this is where your family starts looking at you like, okay, like, what are we doing? Really? You're still not letting the dream die? What do we, come on, can we talk about grad school? Can we talk about maybe get a professorship somewhere, associate, whatever, and
did that Dion song, pardon the interruption there, but did that lead to a publishing deal and then you could focus on artistry?
Well, I suppose it could have, but being who I am, I went to, the ASCAP Pop Awards and all that stuff and just got wasted. And, was kind of the odd duck in the room and I don't know. I looked at everything that was going on in a situation like that, like the ASCAP Pop Awards, and I was sort of like, wow, man, I can dig this, as being cool for what it is and everything. But it was very much, I thought I was careerist. I had nothing on these people in LA at the Beverly Hilton or whatever who were just working the room, man. They were like, you had songwriters in there, man. It was like, oh, this is the day we've been waiting for. We've had this on our calendar for months, and I am going to network the hell out of this situation. I'm going to make sure that everybody here has my business card, my name, my phone number, my resume, my blah, 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 blah. And I'm just coming out there like getting wasted with Dave Pirner from Soul Asylum, and we ended up just trolling around Hollywood acting like fucking fruitcakes. And I had no idea what it really meant to be careerist in a real way, in a way that meant anything to those people, you know. And I knew right then and there that I was not meant for that. Like, I could have gone that songwriter track, you know, where it's like, oh, I'm going on a writing session with so-and-so. Like, now that's the thing, man. You go on 5 writing sessions a day. You know, you should. It's like speed dating. Okay, yep, yeah, second verse. Okay, bye. See ya. And you go on to the next thing. I can't do that, man. That ain't me. It's not me. So I didn't get a publishing deal. I didn't go the songwritery route. I didn't do any of that. I took all the money that I made from the Unsong and learned how to make records. So I was like, I'm living in this apartment at Little 5 Points. There's a studio right across the parking lot, right across down the alley there, and it's a really nice 16-track. They got one of those beautiful Studer 16-track machines, like the state-of-the-art Studer 16. I feel like multi-track recording with tape kind of sort of peaked at the Studer 16-track. That's just me. Not a lot of people feel that way, but, you know, because you have obviously 24 tracks, and you have slaving those machines off of one another to get 48 and more tracks and all that stuff. I feel like in terms of pure audio, the Studer 16-track is arguably the peak. And they had a Studer 16-track here at this place called Casino Recording. And Clay Harper, who's kind of a restaurateur / real estate guy, he owned the place. He used to rent it out. It was really cheap for what it was. I was like, you know what? That's where I'm going. That's what I'm doing. And Madfly came out of me trying to learn how to make records out of Casino Studio, using all the dough that I made. It was like, you know, people were like, you should do this, you should do that, you should buy, you know, you should invest in real estate, you should buy a house, blah, 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 blah. You should go to LA, you should move there, you should become a songwritery guy, I did none of that. None of that. I made Madfly records instead and learned how I wanted records to sound and how to make them sound like I wanted to sound.
So it sounds like, if I can project here, you've got this incredible soul album. You're touring with a band that is playing arenas and festivals and stadiums around the world that's still in top form. And you're one of those people who, I guess, had to have 20 to 30 years of kind of being screwed over or going the tough road to get to this point instead of peaking when you're in your 20s. Yeah. So do you find that now life is, you are where you're supposed to be?
I think so. Overall, I think so. You can always what if yourself to death, but I it's like, what is the point? It's not like I'm going to, you know, turn back time and do all that stuff. And, you know, if I had peaked, as you say, back then, not only would I have been a fucking lunatic, you know, and probably very well dead by now. I mean, but I wouldn't have learned everything. I just wouldn't have learned everything. I wouldn't have learned anything about how to be a person, you know, how to be a real functioning human being in the world. I wouldn't have learned anything about how to make the records I wanted and needed to make, because I would have always had somebody to deal with all of that. Mm-hmm. I would have learned almost nothing about the business, because again, I would have just had, oh, there's so-and-so takes care of that, and so-and-so takes care of that, and oh, they, you know, I just sort of, I get a check and, you know, or a deposit, and they just sort of give me what they think I should have, and I'm okay with that, and it seems to be plenty, and okay, you know, I would have learned nothing about how the apparatus itself works. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I feel like all of that has been just of immeasurable value. and particularly now that the whole paradigm has shifted in terms of not only how people consume music, but how the artists are compensated for it, or in many cases not compensated for it. And so in some ways I feel like I was part of the spearheading of the new paradigm, because it's like, well, in the Madfly days even, I was like advocating, artist ownership of your masters and all, like that was when I got hip to like, oh wow, like these are assets, and this is a whole, like, this is not just I'm looking for a father figure to be my manager, and I'm looking for a record label to be my mother, and we just sign whatever, and we get on with it, and we hope for the best, And it's like, no, this is like, you can be the pilot of all of this. You can be steering the ship of all of this, and there's real consequences if you don't. And it was sort of like, okay, and so, the second Madfly album was a distribution deal with Joan Jett's label,
Blackheart?
Yeah, with Blackheart through Mercury, and it was sort of like, I insisted that it be that, and what I'm saying, it was a beginning of a different mindset. It was the beginning of a different pathway and a different learning curve. And then comes the fall, like, I put out all those records myself. Didn't even want to deal with a distribution deal with anybody. And now I got this catalog that I sort of manage on top of everything else new that I put out. And in that time period that we're talking about, the whole thing shifted. The whole business shifted. Everything,
Spotify and
everything went. Yeah, well, file sharing. I mean, Madfly predates the file sharing. It predates Napster. And then Comes to the Fall was coming into play right as that stuff was becoming a thing. Napster and all of that.
Sure.
And then, of course, you've got social media soon after that. And then you've got streaming after that. And so it's this whole sort of wave after wave coming in to shift the entire dynamic of the business and the monetary flow of the business.
Right.
And it's like, wow, okay, and now I'm sitting on this whole catalog, and it's like, the laws have not caught up with the technology yet.
Right.
Eventually they will. And, so it's an interesting time. And for me in particular, it's been interesting to observe all of this and to operate in the midst of all of it. But again, to answer your original question, it's like, yeah, I feel really good about where I am right now, because it's like, I don't think any of this would have been possible had I, peaked in the early 90s or something, and none of it would have been possible.
Had you had the first single on the first album, had the hit, and then the rest of your life focused on that one hit.
It would have been downhill from there.
Sure.
I think it would have been downhill from there. Yeah, I really do.
So in closing, any last words for the kids?
Oh, for the kids? Buy my record, buy my record, buy my record, buy my record. No. Look, I mean, you mean musicians, aspiring musicians?
Sure.
Because the kids, it's like, look, the kids are going to do what the kids are going to do. I don't even know what the hell you're doing. Stay in school. Go to bed. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the kids who are like me, well, there's nothing I can tell them, because they're going to do what the hell they're going to do. No matter what I say. That's how I was. Nobody could tell me anything, Good luck.
Okay. Last but not least is my chat with Selena De La Renta, one of the standout stars of MLW, an independent wrestling company, but it can be watched around the world on weekly television. Selena is kind of hateable on the screen, but that's how you know that she's really doing her job. She showed a more humble and everyday person kind of side of herself within this phone interview, which we taped last month. And I think it's interesting to see how far she's come professionally. As she talks about in the interview, she has educational aspirations still, but she learned a lot of what she learned from managing a McDonald's. I hope you enjoy that interview. Anybody who watches MLW knows that you are one of the fastest, youngest rising stars in wrestling. But I'm curious when you knew that this was going to be a career and not just, going from gig to gig in the wrestling world.
I decided it was going to be a career pretty much when I started. I had decided and I was determined to make it, but I didn't know if it was going to work. Because when I started, I was a manager at McDonald's, and I was making maybe $300 a week, maybe 400 because a manager makes a little bit more, but, And I was using that money to try and invest in wrestling. Silly as that sounds, all the money I had was for wrestling, for my clothes, and I would sometimes starve. And I really, really wanted to do this. But I would say a year and a half in the business, I was able to quit my job and just do it as a permanent thing. And I was a wrestler at the time. I wasn't even on MLW.
And of course, coming from McDonald's, being such a fitness-oriented person, when did you learn about good eating habits and, keeping a healthy diet?
This year. I did not learn how to eat at McDonald's. I promise you that. I would say this past year I got a coach, and she's helped me a lot with my eating habits because I originally just ate whatever I wanted. And then I would say this past year I've been trying to take more care of myself. And I started losing weight, but it was because I was eating very little amounts of food. And that my coach was like, no, you're doing it all wrong. If you want abs, you have to cook. You have to make your food. And, well, that's how I've been doing it. She gave me a list of stuff, and, yeah, I fixed my eating habit.
And a lot of people point out, which I did in the first sentence of speaking to you, that you are such a young rising star. And MJF is another person that's on the roster that's in his early 20s, that's internationally known and popular and all that. Does it bother you that people so frequently reference your age?
It doesn't bother me. I feel like if I am upfront about it and I say, hey, I'm 22, people immediately think I know less. And I always like to leave that for the end. I had business meetings where people have no idea my age. And then at the very end, I'm like, yeah, I'm 22. And they're like, no, you're not. Yeah, I swear. Oh, for real. And it's always a shocker. So it doesn't really bother me that it's a shock. It's more flattering because that just means that I'm a little more advanced. And I always felt like I was, but now I have affirmation that I am.
Right. So MLW is growing in popularity just as you are. When you came into the company, how does it compare to where it is now?
Well, when MLW started, we drew maybe 300 people, and it was in Orlando. It was like a small thing, and the first show was called One Shot, and it was called One Shot because it was supposed to be a one-time thing, but then it turned into something way cooler. Like everybody wanted it to come back, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, you guys have to run again!" And I think that's why Court was like, "All right, let's try this again." And just every show that we had just had twice the amount of people, and it just kept growing and growing. And I say within like the first 4 or 5 months of us running, we already had television. So the fact that we were able to get that just made us realize that we might just end up blowing up.
And you, I believe, have the first pay-per-view coming up later this year, and you recently announced a partnership with Noah. Are all these opportunities coming to you organically, or does Court just have this big plan of massive goals that he's been working towards?
Well, I don't believe that everything we've had is because it's come to us. I know that Court Bauer works super hard, and he's always doing meetings and trying to see how he can make this company better. So if I were to say if MLW is just growing because people are coming to us, I would say it's 50-50. Because, yes, while we do work hard and Court's always trying to get our brand out there and talking to different people, yeah, because we are popping, there's a bunch of companies that are trying to reach out and see how they can work with us. So I would say 50-50 on that one.
So Promociones Dorado, it keeps growing and growing as well. So I think the theme here is that everything is growing. How does the future look for your group?
The future looks pretty bright because we have a golden ticket. And with that golden ticket, I can get a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship whenever I want. So, I mean, that's pretty great that we have that. And my guys just continue to get better. And you know how I do. If you're not necessarily fit for my group because you can't keep up, then you get cut. So my group is always going to shine. Let's say that.
Absolutely. And you guys were just in New York City taping a show last week, a couple of weeks of television and all that. How far in the future are you guys booked? Is that something that you can share? Like, for example, do you know where the next 3 or 4 months of TV are booked, or is it really one taping at a time?
So depends on the month, but we run, I don't think this is private because you can just look this up online and find out. We run once a month or maybe twice. And during that time, we film, I would say, a month of television, sometimes a little bit more for safety, but it's mainly just 4 weeks.
Did you picture that you yourself were going to be such a high-profile person when you came into MLW? Did you know that you were going to be in this position?
No, I did not see that coming at all. Like, when I joined MLW, I was under the impression that I was going to be an interviewer. And I'd say like a week before MLW started, I got a phone call from Alex Greenfield, who's one of the producers, and he was like, "Oh, hi, Selena. We have change of plans. Do you think they can bring a suit?" I was like, "A suit? I did not own a suit." And I was like, "I don't know about this, but yeah, I'll buy it." And to be honest, when I did that and bought super expensive suits, I barely could afford them. So I was like, man, I'm really like spending a lot more money in wrestling than what I'm making, and I was having a rough time. But because I did that, I guess that they were able to see a different aspect of me. And since I entered, like everybody was like, "Oh my God, you are a businesswoman." And the minute I walked in, everybody just had to say something about it. So I just feel like it was very fitting, and taking a leap of faith just really worked for me.
Is there anything that you want people to know about you in general besides the fact that you are one of the focal points of MLW, or is just life outside of wrestling your private life and that's that?
I don't mind sharing my private life because there's not much to share. Like, I am I would say I'm a career person. Majority of the things that I do are for work. Besides MLW and my current career, I'm working on my plan B. I go to college, and I am doing a bachelor's in dramatic arts with the intention of continuing to study and doing a master's and a PhD in sexology.
It's pretty amazing that you're able to do all that while staying in great shape. So it sounds like you don't sleep a lot.
I really don't sleep much, but I just know that if you work hard, it pays off. And in my mind, maybe this isn't right, but I need to work hard, sacrifice my 20s, I would say, those 10 years of my life, and then after I'm 30, I can just chill and be like, "Hey guys, I worked so hard, and now look what I'm doing." It's called chilling.
Bring back to the original question, do the people that you used to work with at McDonald's know how far you've come, or have you made a clean break from all those people?
No, I talk to a few of them still. My boss, well, he's not my boss anymore, but my boss at the time, he still likes all of my pictures, and my manager as well. She messaged me the other day because I posted, not the other day, it was like a month ago. I posted a picture of me at McDonald's winning a speaker, and I thought it was the greatest thing because I didn't have a speaker or any electronics. So that was like, I won that because I was like the best customer service employee of the week or something. And I was so proud, and I had that achievement, and my face was just glowing. And then I took another picture at MLW, and I'm like, started from the bottom, now we're here. And a couple of the people at McDonald's like still message me, and we go out and talk. So yeah, I don't forget them.
Thanks for listening to the Paltrocast with Darren Paltrowitz on the Pure Grain Audio Network. More information on the Paltrocast can be found online at www.puregrainaudio.com. Until next time, have a great Shabbos.